Ghost of Yotei released a month ago and received a generally positive reception. I myself really enjoyed my time with the game. However, there has been discussion centered around whether the game innovates enough from the previously released Ghost of Tsushima, and in this video, I intend to analyse whether or not it has. So let's start with the combat. Now, I wouldn't say that Ghost of Tsushima's combat necessarily needed to be improved, but Sucker Punch have decided to improve it anyway. The baseline sensation is immediate. Every swing lands with satisfying weight, there is a tactile thump when metal meets flesh, a crunchy bite when you cleave through armour, and the camera leans into hits just enough to sell impact. Animations blend together beautifully, you can utilise your more complicated attacks together when you unlock them, and the game stitches them really smoothly. What changes the rhythm compared with the previous game is the weapon system. Instead of giving you stances like in Tsushima, Ghost of Yotei hands you a small arsenal through the world's weapon masters, where whenever you go to a new region, you can go to the weapon master and unlock a new weapon, and then completing all their side missions will give you more mastery with that weapon. When you walk into an area, for example, and you see an enemy wielding dual swords, your brain doesn't say, use what you've always used. It says, get the spear and decimate him. That design forces you to stay on your toes. Literally swapping your weapon mid-encounter becomes part of the choreography. This isn't even necessary. The combat is generally quite easy, so you can just stick with one weapon if you really want to, but the fights will take longer and it won't be nearly as fun. Because of that counter relationship, every enemy type changes how you approach the fight. That constant adaptation does two things. First of all, it makes encounters feel more varied because a similar encounter could play out completely differently depending on the enemy mix. Secondly, it prevents you from becoming over comfortable. When you can't just spam your favourite weapon over and over again, you're more engaged. You're scanning what the enemy has, you're reading the tells, and you're planning which weapon will spoil their day. The mental flow becomes as important as the mechanical flow. Speaking of which, mechanically, the weapon swaps are pretty damn seamless. There's no clunky inventory fumbling or a weapon wheel, you just switch with two buttons and you slide straight into action with no downtime. That tiny fraction of time where you're committed to a swap is often the most tense moment. Will you pick the right weapon, or will you mess it up and have to do a parry or a dodge and panic? The answer to the risk reward feels quite satisfying because the game makes the tools readily available to you in order to make the right choice. Enemy design reinforces the weapon counter dynamic too. Telegraph moves are readable enough that good timing is rewarded. Cheap instant attacks are pretty rare. For example, spear wielders telegraph lunges with a long, lean back. If you've got the right weapon, you can interrupt this attack. You have plenty of time to do so. Otherwise, you'll want to dodge and close the angle, and then switch when you can. The AI encourages switching rather than punishing your experimentation. If you miss your counter, for example, if you pick the wrong weapon, you then get a hard lesson, and you will make sure to use the right weapon next time. The moment-to-moment loop of assess, switch, engage, and punish keeps you in a near-constant state of, I want to do that again. I usually treasure quiet exploration in games, yet in Yotei, the quiet moments felt like adverts. They were nice, but they only made me look forward to slicing people up again. If Tsushima relied on mastering a single stance loop, Yotei nudges you toward mastery of choices, the dexterity to execute plus the judgment to pick correctly. The result is combat that feels more alive and more reactive. And you of course also have the standoffs, where you can approach an enemy one-on-one and basically first to blink loses. You can also put skill points into extending this, allowing you to take down even more enemies this way, and it just looks so cinematic and gorgeous. I also found that every single boss fight just was absolute cinema. The music, the locations, the boss movesets themselves, the build-up, all of it is just excellent. In short, the combat in Ghost of Yotei hits hard, it looks and sounds great, and its weapon counter ecosystem revitalizes encounters by forcing adaptation. Every enemy type changes the beat of the fight, and because the swaps are so smooth, those changes feel fun instead of fiddly. I would say that there is a definite improvement in the combat from Ghost of Tsushima. But here is where things get a bit complicated. The story of Ghost of Yotei is a tricky beast. On the surface, it's got some pretty nice ingredients. Vengeance, tragedy, cool samurai speeches. But when you dig into it, you start to realise that this flavour's a little bit familiar. Like, you've had this meal before, just in a better restaurant. Atsu's quest for revenge against the Yotei 6 doesn't pack the same narrative punch as Jin's slow moral collapse from the previous game. Jin's story worked because it was messy. Honour versus necessity, tradition versus survival. Here, Atsu's motivation is laser focused and predictable. It's the classic revenge arc. Bad people did bad things, now we go and stab them until justice is restored. There is nothing inherently wrong with that. Revenge stories can be great fun, but it feels like Yotei could have aimed for something a little bit bolder. It does a great job in the many flashbacks of inciting that same anger within you. Watching these people ruin young Atsu's life does get you on her side, and wanting to slice these fools into pieces, but it's still simple. The game does try to balance that simplicity with its presentation. The pacing is pretty slick for the most part, the cinematics are gorgeous, and the writing is sharp enough to carry you through even when you can guess the next plot beat before Atsu does. You're not exactly surprised when the game starts whispering, "Revenge bad," but you go along with it because it's quite well executed. The emotional beats do still land, even if you can see them coming from a mile away. There was the infamous IGN article last month saying that every PlayStation game tells the same story, and whilst I don't agree with that statement as a blanket, I do agree that Ghost of Yotei takes almost zero narrative risks with its story, and decides to tell a story you've seen told better dozens of times before. Atsu herself, though, does carry a lot of the weight. She's not as stoic as Jin, there is more edge, more visible frustration. Her anger isn't theatrical, it sort of simmers, and the real gold comes out in some of the side missions. Away from the main revenge plot, you do get to see her loosen up, joke awkwardly, even show some flashes of warmth. Those moments feel like peeking behind the mask of the Avenger, to see the person who's still trying to hold it all together. Watching her wrestle with that bottled up fury is fascinating, not groundbreaking, but deeply human, if nothing else. Yotei does a great job of making you feel and understand Atsu's rage and her inner confliction as a person. And then there's Lord Saito, the big bad guy. He's not a Saturday morning cartoon villain, he's measured, he's charismatic, and frustratingly underused. Every scene he's in crackles with that poised menace that makes you sit up a little bit straighter, and then he's gone again. I wish we got to see a bit more of him, not too much, because a villain does lose a lot of their aura when they're overused, but a little more would have been quite nice, I feel. The core issue here isn't that Ghost of Yotei tells a bad story, it's that it tells a safe one. Everything about it is competently written and beautifully acted, but after the moral and emotional complexity of the first game, this feels like stepping down a little bit. You'll still care about Atsu, you'll still get caught up in the emotion, but you won't be haunted by it when you've finished the game. In the end, the story kind of just does its job. It gives you purpose, it sets up some solid characters, and it keeps you emotionally invested enough to keep slicing and dicing people. But compared to the previous game's layered exploration of honour and sacrifice, Ghost of Yotei plays it far too safe. You can't help but wish that they'd pushed the boat a little bit further out. Now for the open world, and here is where I am the most disappointed, and it pains me to say that, because on the surface the world is just simply beautiful. Nobody can deny that. It's got the postcard worthy landscapes, it's got the damn wind, the cinematic lighting that makes you just want to live in photo mode. But once you've spent enough time riding across this beautiful world, it starts to grate on you a little bit. Tsushima already perfected this style of open world design. The Ubisoft inspired checklist formula where exploration means moving from one icon to another icon, clearing out camps, bathing in hot springs. For the health boost alone, I promise, it was the best possible version of that formula. You really can't do that style better than Ghost of Tsushima did it. So when Yotei decides to use the exact same blueprint, only slightly tweaked, it inevitably feels like a step back. Not because it's broken, far from it, but because much like the story, it's just so safe. What hurts the most is that Yotei had the chance to innovate. This could have been the moment the series took a risk, maybe changed how exploration works, maybe tied discovery more into narrative themes, maybe done something genuinely fresh. Instead, it plays things completely by the book. The world is functional, it is polished, it is perfectly fine, and that's the problem. Fine doesn't excite me anymore, and I'll be honest, I'm burnt out on this kind of open world. The endless icons, the familiar structure, the go here, clear this, collect that loop. I've played this game a dozen times under different titles, so when I step into Yotei's world and I see that same structure again, even dressed in gorgeous art direction, it's hard not to feel a twinge of disappointment. But, and this is important, I want to acknowledge something that came up in the responses to SkillUp's review of the game. A lot of people pointed out that critics and heavy gamers like myself and SkillUp are far more susceptible to burnout. We play pretty much everything. We live in this constant rotation of open worlds and sprawling maps, so of course we're the first to feel fatigue. The average player, the one Ghost of Yotei is primarily marketed to, probably doesn't feel that same wariness. And honestly, I do feel that's a fair point. For gamers who only pick up a handful of big releases each year, Yotei's world will feel expansive and beautiful and satisfying to explore. In that sense, it's doing exactly what it set out to do. It's catering to the broader audience that fell in love with Tsushima, not the jaded veterans who've seen this open world pattern 100 times. So maybe the lack of experimentation isn't necessarily an oversight, but a conscious design choice. Still, as someone who adores this series and knows how much potential it has, I can't help but wish it had tried to push the boat out a little further. The craftsmanship is there, the artistry is there, but the ambition feels muted, like a samurai too afraid to draw his blade. So where does that leave Ghost of Yotei? It is a fascinating mix of triumph and restraint. The combat, sharper, more dynamic, endlessly satisfying. The story, emotionally grounded, though a little too safe for its own good. The world, breathtaking but stuck in a loop we've already mastered. There's no denying that Ghost of Yotei is a great game. In moments, it is better than its predecessor. It's just that when you look at everything it does right, you can't help but imagine how incredible it could have been if it had dared to reach a little bit further. Maybe innovation just wasn't the goal this time. Maybe this was meant to be a refinement, not a revolution. But still, I can't help but wish that Yotei had taken that swing, even if it risked missing. Because when a series this good chooses to play it safe, it leaves me satisfied, yes, but a little bit heartbroken thinking about what it could have been. In the end, it is a brilliant game that could have been a special game. Sometimes greatness lies not in perfection, but in the courage to try something new, and I hope that when the next Ghost rises, it remembers that. If you have enjoyed this video, then please make sure to leave a like, as it really does help me out. And if you want to see more videos from me, then you should definitely subscribe, because I upload at least one video a week. But for now, that is all. Have a nice day, and goodbye.